Originally to be Nasrat Haqparast versus Sam Patterson at UFC Paris. Out is Patterson, and in on incredibly short notice, announced on August 23rd by MMA Junkie that Ultimate Fighter 31 rookie, the Lone Wolf, no, not Mike Trizano, it's Landon Quinones, is into this matchup. And Matt, for Landon Quinones, the fans probably know him. I mean, he debuted as a pro back in 2019. It was a draw on a Bellator MMA series card to a fighter who went on to lose his next fight and then see you later. That was it. But for Quinones, after that draw, a 7-1 run, all under the Titan FC banner. The one loss, a split decision to Muhammad Naimov, who went on to knock out Jamie Mullarkey back in June. That was a come-from-behind win in that one, and a performance bonus for Naimov. So if you look at it for Quinones, a wild career that he's had, plenty of finishes on that record. And if you consider his last two fights, he had a layoff from 2020 to 2022, major reconstructive surgery on one of his knees. But if you look at Quinones, the movement's still there, tricky sidewinder, a couple of big-time wins back in 2022, one over Reinaldo Acevedo, who got really tired in that fight and just exhaustion did him in, and then Yemi Odewale, where he was able to go out there and have a very competitive fight. Quinones ends up on the Ultimate Fighter Season 31. Coach Conor McGregor did what he did at the end of the fight. What did he say? If you had to guess, would you think he went, because he wasn't listening to Quinones, did he go, I know. Yeah, he did that. But Quinones goes out there against Jason Knight, a.k.a. Hick Diaz. And Quinones is putting the pressure on him. They're having kind of a knock him out, drag him out brawl. Quinones gets the takedown and takes himself into a triangle, and he gets finished. So for Quinones, maybe not the greatest move, but when you look at Quinones' fights, they're a lot of fun. And for Nasrat Haqparast, a channel favorite. He came in on about a month's notice, replacing one of Matt's favorite fighters, Teemu Packalén, to take on Marcin Held, former Bellator Season 10 lightweight winner.
And he did way better than he should have.
And title challenger. And Nasrat struggled with the takedowns, but he dropped Marcin Held. So losses to for Nasrat Haqparast in a 10-fight UFC run, 6-4. The losses: Dan Hooker, Bobby Green, Marcin Held. You remember at least those, including the Drew Dober fight where he did get finished. But if you look at it for Haqparast, a wild knockdown ratio of 5-1. He was knocking everybody down earlier on. And for Haqparast, the craziest thing for me is wrestling defense. Remember his fight against Alexander Munoz, the wrestling coach from Team Alpha Male? Defends all those takedowns, matadored him, struck on the outside. Haqparast in his last number of fights, if you go back his last four, 87 of 266 significant strikes. That's good for 32.7. Have been to the body. And he's up that number as his UFC career's gone on. So look out for the body shots from the counter-striking that is coming from Nasrat Haqparast. And when you pair these two guys up, I bet there's going to be a feeling out process for quite a bit of the first round, seeing as not just being on short notice this fight, but two tricky southpaw strikers in this one as well. And for Quinones, John Anik's going to be all over it because his head coach is Roger Crawl, and I don't know a guy that likes Crawl more than John Anik.
Is that how you... Okay.
Loves him.
I have a really hard time with this fight because Nasrat Haqparast is such an interesting fighter. And I remember talking about this a lot before Dricus du Plessis, who should be fighting on this card, fought Robert Whittaker. And it was, hey, Robert Whittaker might be 32 years old, but it's an old 32. And I picked Robert Whittaker to win that fight, don't get me wrong, but I just wanted to make sure people understood that, hey, he's not really what his age is, he is much older. And for Nasrat Haqparast, he hasn't eaten the kind of damage that Robert Whittaker has, but he's been around the UFC for an awful long time for a guy who is only 28 years old, and we really have seen him grow up in front of us, because like you mentioned, the majority of those losses happened on pretty major fight cards, and they were pretty big fights that everybody does recognize and remember. And for Haqparast, you're ready to go to the body more, but this is my thing with Nasrat. Is he ever going to really start making these major improvements to his game, or is he just going to make these slight alterations? Because Haqparast now is still a very similar fighter he was when he initially came into the UFC.
He debuted at 22, and for Haqparast, he's jumped around so many gyms. There's a couple of fighters on this card. They've jumped from gym to gym to gym. Haqparast from Germany, the TriStar, to King's MMA. And in his corner for this one, he's going to have Felipe Delamonaco, who's the head coach at Gracie Baja HQ. He was in the corner of Cub Swanson. Didn't really need him when he took on Hakeem Dawodu. He's been in the corner of Naaman Gracie. A lot of those guys in Southern California. But Haqparast, I think he's just been kind of pulled in a lot of directions.
This is my thing with Nasrat. when he wins fights, what's it normally come down to? His phenomenal hand speed. Like, that is the thing that does make him very unique in this division. But that's something he has. Like, that's just, he was born with that. He has great hand speed. That's not something he has picked up as his UFC has continued. Yes, he used it in slightly different ways, but you bring up the body shots. It's not like he's going to the body like a prime Mike Tyson stopping guys that way. Like, he's just throwing more of his volume to that one area, but he's always been a pretty high volume fighter. The thing about Nasrat, though, is he'll have those periods where, hey, it's great flurries from the outside moving in, but he's not a great pocket fighter. He can get overwhelmed in that position. But the thing about Nasrat is, if he could just fight like he did against Mullarkey more often, he would be right back to where he wanted to be. Like, that was one of those performances where, for everything you want to say about Nasrat, if he could just look like even 70% of the fighter he was on that very night, that's a really skilled fighter. He closed the distance effectively. He landed massive power shots in his own right. He was able to avoid some really tricky shots from Mullarkey in that matchup. I know I haven't talked about Quinones much. It's just, for Haqparast, I don't know, the limitations of his game, but also his phenomenal strengths in other parts of his game have always made him a difficult guy to predict, I think.
And a fight of the night for Haqparast in Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada against Thibaut Goudy.
He beat the brakes off him.
He also had a performance of the night bonus right around that time. It was back-to-back against Joaquim Silva, who co-main evented a UFC card this summer.
He blew the doors off him early in that fight.
He did. So when you look at it for Haqparast, the hand speed, the southpaw nature, he'll throw an occasional head kick, but he's pretty well a boxer. For Landon Quinones, kicks to all three levels. You go back, you watch these fights. I was very, very impressed because I thought, okay, a guy that was on The Ultimate Fighter that loses his kind of first fight in the quarterfinals to Jason Knight, well, that's not good. But then you go back and you watch the performances that Quinones had, and he's going to be a guy like Kiefer Crosbie, kind of a tweener in some of these weight classes. First 6 fights for Quinones, kind of like Chuck Buffalo, 155 to 170. Quinones, first 6 at featherweight, and if you find him on Instagram, the end of his handle is 145, but his last 4 fights have been at 155 pounds, and he seems to fill out the weight class pretty well. Both of these guys, similar size-wise, height-wise, reach-wise. So, eager to see these two in the cage, see what we get out of Quinones. If we see some of those takedowns like we saw against Azevedo and Odewale, but yeah, all 3 kicks to all 3 levels, and Quinones has a really good leg kick, and he tends to shore up, and he doesn't have a big wind-up reset to it. So, when you look at the odds in the matchup, Haqparast is a massive favorite. We have a look at the Topology votes, Matt. Haqparast is a fan favorite, not just on Fight Night picks, but on Topology, surely. I'm going to say over under 80% going with Haqparast.
I think it'll be over.
And it is over, so 889 total votes, 88% Haqparast, 77% by decision for the 12% that have the Lone Wolf. 51% by knockout. Matt, Landon Quinones following in the footsteps of, the only other lone wolf that was in the UFC. It was Mike Trizano. He went 4-3. Can Quinones do better? We'll see. Who do you have in the matchup?
I have Nasrat, and a lot of it does come down to the short notice nature for Landon. Like you would know, or you mentioned it. August 31st is when this man was notified of the fight. 23rd, sorry, thank you. That wasn't that long ago. And for Nasrat Haqparast, he was getting ready for a very tricky fighter in Sam Patterson only a week ago. So I don't really think he would have had that long pause throughout camp to where he would kind of lose focus. And I understand new opponent, you are going to have to train new skills. But for Nasrat, I know I mentioned he hasn't made massive improvements throughout his career, but he was still a pretty good fighter when he first came in. And I still think he's a decent fighter now. It always has been the thing though. Every time you have a new prospect kind of fighting somebody in the top 15, you always think, oh, Nasrat's name is kind of in that category, but he always feels like he's 1 or 2 fighters away, so he is going to have to go out there and look impressive in this matchup.
This is a tough fight. And I know Haqparast's a 4-1 favorite in the fight, but when you look at Quinones and the strengths that he possesses, he can strike on the outside with his kicks. When he's in tight, he can land elbows and uppercuts, and he has good takedowns. And for Haqparast, he was able to capitalize when John Makdessi in his last fight got in close. You saw it in the second round. Makdessi flies with his head out and his arm out for a spinning back fist, and Haqparast over the top with a looping overhand left drops Makdessi. But for the most part, Haqparast is able to kind of figure things out and work the boxing. So for me, I will go with Haqparast. It does feel like the safe pick in this one, but if you guys have Quinones, you make sure you let us know. I'd love to see these two guys square off on Friday before the fights. Question mark kicks. It's on Saturday. Final opportunity for the picks and predictions. We got some big time fights in this card. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it.